Good morning. This is Meg Riley in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you've joined us for another episode of The VUU. Before we introduce today's guests, our last time with the Commission on Institutional Change, let's have our regulars say hello, and then we have some things to talk about before we move into that exciting discussion. Aisha, how is it out west?
Hi, I'm Aisha Hauser. I'm in Seattle. It is early and bright and sunny, and it does not get dark till, I don't know, 1 in the morning. No, that's Alaska, like 10. So when it's sunny and daylight, it's very bright and beautiful. So that's here. Chris?
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Rivera. I'm coming to you from Charlottesville, Virginia. It is beautiful on the muggy side, and it looks like it wants to have a really bad thunderstorm here in just a few minutes. So who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Michael, how you doing?
Good morning, everyone. This is Michael Tino in Peekskill, New York. It is a hot, muggy summer day here in New York, and we're doing okay. There's one day of school left in the school year. And for those of you listening on the podcast, I'm giving that big, scary air quotes because, what does the passage of time even mean anymore? But we're doing okay. It's good. It's good to be here. It is really, really good to be here with you all. Antonia, how are you?
I am doing well. We have finished all of the school. I am also doing air quotes. And thank God. I saw a meme that said something like, "Oh, I'm so glad report cards are coming out. Wait, I can't wait to see how well I did." So, yeah, I am done. Thank goodness everyone survived. I don't believe any traumatic things happened, but I will just put more money in the therapy fund just in case they have something to talk about later. It is muggy and kind of dark in Delaware. We had lots of storms last night, so I guess not lots of new growth will happen. And you can find me over at our YouTube channel in the chat. Talk to the commission, talk to our host, and I will get those messages to them. How's everything going, Meg?
Well, I want to say this is my last time being on The VUU, and I just want to lift up what a blessing it's been for me. I have learned so much here. We've had amazing guests. Kind of retrospective, I remember for a couple years, Black Lives of UU came every month and spoke with us. And this is our 7th visit with the commission. And we've just had so many amazing people doing positive, groundbreaking, exciting, multicultural, anti-oppressive work. And I especially want to shout out to Aisha and Christina, who really helped to transform The VUU from just kind of a general chat show into a much more focused and meaningful time, and to say how I often say to people, I learn stuff every week. If you want to learn, come to The VUU. It is definitely religious educators at work. It is a faith formation space. And so I'm really just sad. It's one of my favorite hours every week. And also it feels like a wonderful legacy, however it moves forward in the future with new leadership. I just am delighted to have been part of this. So I just wanted to say all that. And then I think a little celebrating about the Supreme Court, along with a little grieving about the Supreme Court, is in order. Christine, you want to start us with some celebration?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court said that Trump was incorrect in trying to overturn DACA. They did leave kind of a window, the same way they left a window into overturning the census decision. They basically said he used the wrong, he went about it the wrong way. So there's some window opening to quote unquote try and go about it the right way, but it's really good news for thousands and thousands of people who have DACA status, who just have not been able to live their full liberated lives. And this doesn't certainly mean that they can. DACA status is still very tenuous, doesn't apply to everybody that it needs to apply to, but it's a win, and we will take it and be excited. And it's just so great to have it happen, a day before Juneteenth. Really just couldn't be more happy.
Michael, you want to talk about the other yay win?
Sure, I can. Earlier this week, was that just this week? Yes, it was my birthday. It was Monday. The Supreme Court ruled that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 um, covers non-discrimination on the basis of gender and gender identity and sexual orientation under the category of sex, which is the word that's in the law. And I learned, this is interesting for my historian friends, because I have lots of historian friends, that the word sex was put into the Civil Rights Act in 1964 by racist politicians who were trying to derail the entire bill. And they thought that by including the category of sex in that bill, that people who wanted to give civil rights protections on the basis of race would vote no. And they lost that that battle because it was enacted into law, um, and now we have this, and it's good news. And already, one possible outcome of that is that our current administration's attempts to repeal non-discrimination in healthcare on the basis of gender identity can be challenged using that ruling. And I I don't want people to die while that's wending its way through the courts. That breaks my heart. But if that provides a legal justification to challenge that heinous rollback of civil rights protection for transgender people, then I'm glad for it.
Yeah, and also the ban on transgender people in the military
Mhm.
stands to be reexamined. Yeah, on the radically disappointing front, I'll answer as a Minnesotan here that the Supreme Court declined to look at qualified immunity, which means basically that police never get challenged on murders. Interestingly to me, Clarence Thomas dissented from the majority view. I mean, that is a rare thing where I think good for you, Clarence.
Clarence Thomas and Sonia Sotomayor were the dissent
Yeah.
in that, and let's think for a moment of what they have in common
He
that
didn't
nobody
surprise
else
me, but
on the
he
Supreme Court does.
exactly, exactly. Yeah. So, and any other Supreme Court things anyone wants to lift up? There's been a lot. I'm sure I haven't followed it all. Anyway, I think many of us feel like a mixed bag is a lot better bag than we thought we might be holding. So, hey. Well, anything else? Oh, I just wanted to shout out to the Berry Street lecturers last night. That was quite amazing. I love that they lifted up Reverend Dr. Leslie Takahashi as part of it and named it for a beautiful meditation that she wrote that many of us go back to over and over. That was a really sweet moment, and it was good. It was just really, when something's good online, it's really good. So anybody else want to say anything about them? Any of the talks?
I think I just want to say one thing about the Berry. So it's the 200th anniversary, and the introduction given by Reverend Kate Walker talked about how often the Berry Street lectures never talked about what was happening in the country, which I kind of knew, but then when it was said out loud, and so I was really grateful that the three folks who presented, Danielle DeBona, Kimberly Quinn Johnson, and Joseph Santos Lyons, did not do that, and neither did Leslie. And the more recent Berry Street lectures were much more about what's in context. But it was interesting to hear how often somebody was married to a suffragette and did not talk about the suffragette movement during the. So just wanted to name that sometimes while we love our intellectualism, we miss the mark. It doesn't help our movement.
Well, let's get going then with the Commission on Institutional Change. We're excited that you're back and that you've sent out the publication and that we've all had a chance to look at it. Maybe some haven't gotten to it yet till school's out or something, but share how it's gone out and how it's going to continue to go out. How about that for a start?
Yes, and I'm very excited that we have on screen this particular episode our amazing project manager, Marcus Fogliano, and I'm going to invite them to tell us that how it's going out to people.
All right. So the commission's final report has been released. It is available to view through General Assembly at the UUA's website at uua.org/UUA governance /committees/CIC. You can find the report and view it there. We will also have, it is also available to purchase through the UUA bookstore from that webpage. So we hope everyone will take an opportunity to look through the report. We will be at General Assembly this coming week doing a presentation to the General Assembly along with 2 different workshops. The presentation will be at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, and at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday will be the workshops.
Thank you.
So that is our first exciting piece of news, right? Yeah. So we're grateful to have the report out, and as we said in a earlier conversation with all of you, it's very significant to us because we consider it a great legacy, that it is the work of the Black people, the Indigenous people, and the people of color of this movement collectively, and it represents a lot of the shared wisdom that has been, you know, out there for decades and literally generations, that we have had the privilege of, you know, kind of an exhausting privilege, but a privilege nevertheless to mine and to, you know, order and to sort and to cull. And it's, we're excited not only about the report, but about all the data that went into the report, which will reside at the Sankofa archive of Meadville Lombard Theological School, because that'll also be a really important piece. One of the things we found was that so much of this history has been lost, these accounts, just as we're finding in the nation, speaking about current events, right, and tying it in, just as we're realizing that this uprising is happening because there are so many untold stories that have been held closely within families and communities that haven't been able to be told. We have our own version of that. And so we're really glad to have the report there to document it. And it might be worth just allowing Natalie Elias and Elias actually first, and Natalie and Mary to make any kind of comment on that.
No, I think for me, what I would like to say is yes, it's really exciting for us to be able to reclaim and recover some of that memory in a more permanent form. But to memories to be active, they have to be remembered. And remembering, I think, is important for us as a movement to be proactive and engaging this work, not for the sake of us only, but for the sake of future generations.
Natalie or Mary, any thoughts about the release of the report? It's just been, you know, something fun to do in our winter and our year this year. Kept us off the streets. Oh no, wait, that was something else. Oh,
I think we were concerned about writing a report because we didn't want it to become, you know, just something that's set on a shelf. And so, you know, my greatest hope for it is that as people read it and I digest it, it becomes an action guide more than it is a report on, because it captures this moment in time. And I'm hopeful that it just becomes something that is obsolete because all the recommendations have been actioned and people have dreamed up new actions and activities that that relate to it and carry it forward into their work. That's my great hope for it. Well,
actually, I had a conversation, you know, about our workshop that Aisha was in, and it was great to see that the report could spark people thinking about how to work with it. So, from a religious education point of view, you know, Aisha offered up thinking about it as a curriculum, thinking about it as a study guide, thinking about it as a work plan, thinking about it as, and for me, I hope people think about it as something to wrestle with. That it is, as Mary said, it's a moment and a marker of a moment that people could use then to plot a course forward from this moment. It isn't meant to be static. I never thought it was meant for anybody to just swallow whole and take it as it is. I personally welcome people who have problems with it, who have dissenting opinions, who have other suggestions. But the value of it, and I hope the value of the commission's work, it was a commitment to have these as living, ongoing conversations, and to incorporate, as Leslie said, and to hold dear the stories. These are people's lives that are included in this report. These are people's commitments to our faith and the ways in which that has not always been honored. And so I hope that people will lift those up and honor those things and then use them to move forward. We talk about people who have given, people who have been martyrs. And if their lives, if we are not to devalue their lives and their experiences in our faith, then we have to commit to using what they have given to move us forward, to widen the circle, to include them, to acknowledge that we didn't include them before, but we are sorry. And we wish to honor them now and include them now and use them in ways and their experiences in ways that enrich other people. So we don't make the same mistakes. We don't do the same harm. We don't undervalue anyone going forward.
So, go ahead, Meg.
Well,
Just one other quick thing.
Sure. I will say that for Charles Dumond and me as incoming co-moderators, we are looking at it as a work plan and a guide, and I'm very, very grateful for the immense amount of work, research, and distillation that went into it. And I've seen comments already coming through Darby Lockbridge. I'm still working through it, but so far it has me shook. It's so good. It really, it's so helpful for the whole movement, all of the work you did. So profound gratitude.
And we're grateful to you and Charles for taking this up as part of your work. And the two things I was going to say quickly are just that I want to highlight what Natalie said is, we consider this to be continuing the dialogue. The dialogue has been going on for as long as there has been Unitarian Universalism, really. And we want to really remember that every single time we've come here and every single time we talk about our work, we talk about our theological roots. And I think that's really important. And I want to kick that over to Elias in a minute. But, it is really important for us to remember that it is too easy for us to buy into the larger culture of our nation now, which is all about freedom and individualism. This kind of rabid hyper-consumerism that translates into, you have to let me do everything I want. And that is particularly amplified by some aspects of our tradition. And so I think this is a really important call, not only to widen the circle in terms of whose stories we hold as precious, whose lives we hold as precious, whose religious journeys we hold as precious, but it is also an important call back to our faith, because no one needs to be reminded that we're in difficult times, right? Every time we've appeared before you, it's been a more and more complicated world, right? So our faith is going to have to hold us in this time. So I do want to kick it to Dr. Elias, just to talk for a moment about our theological base.
Yeah, before I said that, I want to say something very short, because I think it's important, and it's really grounded by part of the tradition for me, right? When we think about freedom, that the responsible search, right, for truth and meaning, it can become very individualistic and very atomistic in a way that is problematic because it's not in community. There's something that we can extract from really concept of political theory and democratic living, that is the distinction between negative rights and positive rights. Right? The positive rights are those that you get to do, and you're free to move in particular ways in the world. The negative rights are the ones that restrain you from doing, because it would be impinging and damaging other people. And those rights are always in tension with one another. I think one of the things about our particular movement has been that folks have overemphasized the positive rights, right? My ability to do something in a way that has become unencumbered, right? And it's associated from community. So when I'm accountable and I'm responsible for something, I'm not responsible just to myself. I'm responsible and accountable because others are making demands on me, right? There are other demands our ethical demands, our moral demands, not only by other individuals, but as a community of faith. So we oftentimes kind of forget that and think that it's just what makes me comfortable, what makes me happy, what I think is true, regardless of what other folks said. So there's no an openness, right, to be in right relationship, to be in deep conversation. And for me, I can say in these moments I've been really frustrated, right? Frustrating to me because I know that if I were to come with my academic hat into some of those conversations, right, the first things I'm going to say is I'm an elitist. And it's like, well, I have to prepare myself for some of those conversations twice, right? Because I have to know everything that you know, and I have to know extra stuff to come into those conversations, plus life experience, right? Plus coming in a way that I respect and honor your dignity, right? In a way that you will not respect mine and those who look like me, right? And are part of my community. So it's really challenging, right? To keep a calm demeanor, right? To be aware of that. And for me, I think it's part of the work of being a person of faith, right? To be faithful to the call, to be faithful to the community and to the aspirations. So I think for me that's something that I hope as we engage in theological pieces that we really feel challenged to really deepen our understanding. I think that there's a lot of, in my experience so far in 2 decades, almost 2 decades in being with you, is that folks, there's a perception that we know about a tradition, right? There are things on the ethos that many of us get drawn because of the ethos, but it's not that we're drawn to live deeply into the work of who we are as a faith tradition. And what I fear is that we have moved from tradition into traditionalism, right? And traditionalism being, right, the dead faith of dead people, right? That we don't use them anymore, instead of more tradition that is, the living faith of those who came before us, that we can, tradition into the future. And I think when we talk about with theological grounding, that was key, because we have seen a really strong petering out of UU theological thinking, right? And what I mean by that is not solely that we do a lot of personal theology, right, and a lot of personal reflection on who we are and the things that we understand to be sacred, but we don't do a lot of the larger theological work connected to the tradition, right? Of those, we have very few since the 60s, right, who have done more robust UU theology, and that is almost 50 years going into 60 years now. And that's a big of a challenge, right, for us to think as a movement that will require us to recover some work, but also do some new work intentionally. And the last thing that I want to say about this theological piece for us is that theology is more is really effective when it's lived in practice, right, and in community, right. So this is not it is not just book knowledge for book knowledge sake. It is book knowledge in connection to our practices, in connection to how do we organize our structures, right, in connection to how do we develop a very rich worship life, right, within our community. And I think folks don't oftentimes, our people are not oftentimes aware of the theological work that happens in worship, right? Very few folks actually reflect that the order of service, right, is actually theological work happening, is formation work in process happening. Folks don't even think about it. It's the thing that we always do because we inherited from I don't know when, but very few folks actually reflect on the meaning of that tradition, right? In order to innovate in a tradition, you have to know it. And lastly, the last point that I want to make is I think it's really important, right, in our context to really take the sacred work that we need to do seriously, because the future of the faith depends on it, right? And I think many of us who are, I can feel somewhat free to say 40 and over, most of us migrated from other religious traditions into Unitarian Universalism. But there is a growing generation of folks who grow completely unchurched and unreligious. That are starting to then explore what does it mean to be a religious tradition, right? And coming into spaces like ours that oftentimes can be very open, but also somewhat watered down. A lot of those folks are making an option to go into more conservative and traditional spaces, because then they will have something to chew on, right, theologically and spiritually, to then make a decision. So I think we need to, it behooves us, right, to be really engaged. And I know I said this before, to become mission driven, right, with evangelism, do that kind of outreach, or whatever we want to call it, right, to be able to tradition, right, the good things of our faith, right, forward to the next generation. And I'll pass it on to Leslie.
So a couple things I'll also pick up from Natalie, and maybe ask Natalie to say a few more words about this, but the idea that this is something that's ongoing work. One of the probably most important things we realized when we started was what happens when we drop our commitment along the way to consistently trying to widen the circle, to consistently trying to address those biases and other ways that we are decentering the stories of people that we need to be hearing, right? So that we basically deny humanity, some people's basic inherent worth and dignity. And when we drop that as an association, we lose more time than just the time we dropped, right? We undo just decades of work. And we came into this at a period where that had happened. And so one of the most important recommendations in this report that has a lot, as Natalie said, of stuff. And we don't expect that every single one of those is going to be, there's a couple we feel pretty strongly about, and we don't think every single one of them is going to be implemented exactly as we wrote it. Imagine that. But the one that we feel pretty strongly about is the call for an ongoing, commission, an ongoing function of the commission, both accountability and monitoring, and also an ongoing set of goals that are focused on mission, as Aaliyah said, but an ongoing function of continuing to discern what work we need to do. Because I'll tell you, we finished this report for all intents and purposes in February, and we live in a different world than we lived in February, right? So in reality, I still think a lot of what we have in there is even more relevant now because of the world we live in. And a year from now, I look forward to the recommendations of a new commission. So one of the things you'll be hearing about at General Assembly, those of you that are going, and I hope if you're not going, you'll consider going if you care about this particular commitment, and that is you'll be hearing about a need to keep this function going, and and being asked to authorize that. And I think that's really important. So I did want to mention that. And I think, Natalie, you've watched this over a long period of time in many different capacities, and I just wonder if you would speak to that need for continuity and accountability.
Yeah, well, I'd like to tie that need to what Elias was saying about our theological work. One thing that I think we don't think about a lot is why we need to gather, why we are in community, even if it's on Zoom, right? We've committed to a faith tradition that calls us out of ourselves to be with other people. And part of that is because the things that we're trying to do to be more inclusive, to throw off some of what is in the culture around us, is hard to do. And we are here to support each other in doing it. So I think we're asking as the commission that the association understand that when it invites people into membership, it is doing it for this reason, so that we can continue the hard work of change and transformation and be supportive and loving of each other as we do that. And make that commitment. In a community, we can make that commitment that we won't drop it and we will continue. And our theological statements, our worship life is to support that movement, that action. And to be a living faith is to live with people and travel with them consistently through what they are encountering in life. So it is to be ready to hold people in this moment when suddenly there's a pandemic, or suddenly someone is killed, suddenly your community is in revolt. We should always be prepared for that. That's what we're doing all the time, is to be prepared for that. So the commission's report is just another way of asking us to be prepared, to be ready, to be in constant support of ourselves as individuals and in the community. So if we're committed to that, then actually these moments, like what we're having now, should not rock our world, because we recognize that these things are always happening to somebody somewhere. And that's what the stories that are in the report say to you, that maybe you weren't looking, but these things were always happening to somebody somewhere, right? And so let's now commit to be in a community that's always holding people, because somebody is always suffering, right? And can we be a community that's always there holding people And so that commitment, Leslie's been, clear in asking us, do we have that level of commitment that we will not stop and start? Can we reorganize ourselves to be constant, to be faithful? To be faithful is to be constant. And can we recommit to that kind of faithful consistency around this area and incorporate into all that we are, that justice, inclusion, equity, anti-racism, anti-white supremacy, pro-Blackness is who we are, and we are faithful to it across time and space.
So one of our viewers, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Shige Sakurai, pointed out that names implementation and accountability. The report itself references older reports that weren't implemented. What will make this time different, and how can we help with that, maybe through GA? So we do know there is opposition to a report hoping to move us forward. So maybe one of you wants to speak to that and how folks who are supportive of this important work can help.
Okay, I want to speak to that if I could. I have this new piece that the last couple of weeks and the amazing Black-led, youth-led movement that's sweeping our nation, Black and brown-led movement, has taught me, and it has to do with the way that politeness is tied into the network that binds us all and keeps us from widening the circle. And I say that because there may be some really difficult conversations that are going to need to happen around this General Assembly. And, I have some fear around that, because in all media world isn't a great place to have some of those conversations. So I think we have to also weigh that. But I do think it's important to recognize that we're in a moment that's very important for our nation and also for our faith. And there are people out there saying that the most important value of our faith is freedom. That the most important value of our faith is to be able to say whatever I want. If I want to come in and say things that are racist or biased, or I don't want to be educated, or I'm a minister and I don't want to go back and do more training, even though every other profession in the world goes back to do, more learning as an ongoing way, especially in a living tradition, then the most important value is that I be able to continue to be free to do whatever I want. And we're arguing that if freedom and individuality are the only things we have to offer, we should, we might as well just shut our doors, right? That we have a lot more. We have an amazing tradition about honoring each life, right? We have an amazing tradition that understands our interdependence to each other. Those are life-changing, life-saving values, and they're the walls we can really create sanctuary for all the people that already need it, right? But what I think is so important is that we be willing to be sometimes a little socially awkward about this and say things in spaces where people don't want them said. We've been talking about that in saying that and having conversations, for example, in families. If you can't be on the street right now, one thing you can do to support Black lives is to have a conversation within your own family structure or friend structure, right? So I've been talking to a lot of people in my congregation that have been doing that in their workplaces, really finding how hard it is, but taking that step. And we're going to have to do that in our friendship circles within Unitarian Universalism too. And I particularly want to call on Mary Byron to address this, because I think that what's going to be critical about this is that those people who have studied and prepared themselves to be advocates and to be in alliance with Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color really are going to need to step up, because many of us are still working on other things right now, and it's really important. Like Sir Lebert, for example, is not here because there's been a series of murders in Akron that he's having to deal with right now. And so it's going to be really critical for us to have our white identified UUs who care about this vision that where we widen the circle to be willing to be at General Assembly, be delegates, be voices on the floor, be voices on social media, and quite frankly, shut it down. Shut down the people that are saying that this needs to end. It is time to shut it down, folks, and we need to shut it down because it's the, you know, it only has, and then I will turn it over to Mary, I promise, but I feel a little passionately about this. It only takes one comment. You could be a new UU at your first GA and you hear one comment go unaddressed and you walk away. That's the last thing you ever hear about UU, and especially in a virtual GA, right? We need to shut it down, I think, you know, as much as possible before this General Assembly, because it's time that people don't have to go through that process of thinking they've found their faith home and then coming in and hearing someone say something that is uneducated, not based in fact, not based in any kind of reality, and then going away hurt and, you know, not coming back. So with that, I turn it over to Mary.
All right. Well, the only thing I would add, because in my head I was going, oh yeah, the shut it down. That's exactly what, but that is shutting it down everywhere you see it, every time you see it. And, you know, so that should just be a part of the, you know, the practice that we would encourage all, you know, white UU people to have, is to be shutting it down everywhere it comes up, but also to not be afraid to instigate the conversation as well, right? To start it with the people that you know need to hear a different point of view, and to be prepared for those conversations, and to not leave them, to have the courage to stay in them, and the care for everyone to stay in those conversations. I loved what Natalie said before about we're in this community to support one another, to do the hard work, but do it together and also be a joyous experience. And so we should be, you know, willing and stepping forward to be doing that work now, or now more than ever.
Leslie, you mentioned people insisting that our highest value is freedom. And I want to go a little deeper into your response to that, because I think that it's one thing to say we have other values, which we have, you know, we have other things that are important, but I would go so far as to say, and don't know if you all would agree with me, but I would go so far as to say that we have values that are more important, that are actually more important than freedom, especially individual freedom, that relationship and accountability in relationship, and like actually the way that we treat one another is more important. Like actually theologically, to me, more important than my individual freedom. Is that something that am I on the right track here? I'm wondering.
Well, first of all, I probably should apologize. I've been actually on the streets, I think, a little bit too much to be on the VUU. So I'll try to get kind of calm myself down there a little bit. But I'm going to punt this to Natalie in a minute about covenant, because I think that's so critical. And Natalie has, I think, schooled us all throughout these 3 years about a couple things, and that's one of them. But I do want to say this, that I want to be really clear. I think that when I say shut it down, I do think it's important that we create places for dialogue, but dialogue actually needs to be dialogue, not just people putting up, again, I really have been in too many images from our streets right now, but not just barricades, you know, not just lines of people in riot gear, which is what it's feeling to me like, you know, the metaphor that I'm feeling with some of it, you know, not actually being willing. I was on a call last night that that literally made me physically sick with our police force, with our, the town manager and a police officer involved in the shooting of a young mentally ill Black person in our community last year, that we're trying to get attention to. And, you know, they basically said, well, we're here to listen, and then proceeded to lecture to us for 40 minutes. And never and then talked about a rumor of somebody being hit by a rubber bullet who was that was trying to vandalize cars. And it was that's actually someone who grew up in our congregation who has brain injury now, was hit, and was doing a direct action, nowhere near cars, nowhere near anything. So and why I'm saying this example is because I think there are ways that we get into things that aren't actual conversation in the name of freedom. This false idea of freedom, which is I have the right to keep saying my piece over and over again, whether or not it's grounded in fact, whether or not it's grounded in reality, whether or not it reflects the truth of what's actually happening in the world. It's the world that I'm comfortable in, and it's the world that I want. And this is kind of rude, I know, but like it is the world I want, but it is not the world that's actually out there. And that's the kind of stuff that I think we have to shut down.
And whether or not what I'm saying is hurting other people. Right. I mean,
right.
Which we've seen again and again is that people get on their soapbox and spout their 40-minute diatribe or whatever it is, the equivalent of the 40-minute diatribe, and it's hurting people.
Right.
What they're saying is hurting people.
Right. And your point about covenant is really well taken. And this is the last thing I'll say about this, because I think it's really important. And that is that, there are ways, just like there are ways for people to support this movement for Black lives right now, no matter what their situation is. If they can't leave their house, they can write letters. They can call their legislators. They can, there is something that you can do. If they're not ready to do that, they can educate themselves. They can learn and go on and see the endless amount of information there is for people to learn about. They can talk to a neighbor, they can listen to accounts, they can actually listen instead of diatribing against someone who's actually had real experience. They can be in the streets, they can support people who are in the streets, they can support bail funds. There are lots of things people can do. There's lots of entry ramps, but what I think we're saying is it's time to stop debating whether or not we need to do this, because it's beyond, we went to exhaustive length to document that it's necessary to do this, but it is time to just go ahead and do it. So in the name of covenant and in the name of who we are. So with that, I'll turn it over to Natalie.
Covenant. I grew up in the African American Baptist tradition. I'm deeply congregational. I mean, I don't, in my world, Unitarians don't know a thing about being congregational. And so when we get in the congregational meetings and people get a little heated, and I said, well, did anybody take their chair and found a church across the street? Then we're good, because that's my tradition. Just you got to really believe it if you want to be there in that community. You are committed to that community. If you don't believe it, you go somewhere else. But you don't stay there. You don't stay there to undercut those people who are committed to that community. So I think we need to ask some harder questions about people and what they are committed to when they come into our congregations, right? And I don't think that is about creed. I think that is about covenant. It is about a commitment to try to be in this community in that loving and supporting way that you're talking about, Michael, and that we are not here. You don't have the right to try to dehumanize people in your faith community. That is not acceptable. If you can't figure that out, then you need to walk away and come back. The door is always open, but if you need to take a, it's like Nancy Pelosi says about Donald Trump. If you're a toddler having a tantrum, go get your time out and come back later after you calm down. We're here for you, right? We're here for you, but we don't have to tolerate everything. We can call it for what it is. This is not helpful to the religious community at this moment. We are not disrespecting you. We recognize you have a voice, but right now your voice is inappropriate. Right? Your tone is inappropriate. Use your inside voice now. And we can call those things out in respectful ways. We can build a structure that can hold difference. But we also need to understand that we have neglected often to build a structure where people who have been on the outside have a way to the center, right? I believe that one of the errors in, if I was queen, the principle that I least like actually is the use of the democratic process. Because it's been interpreted over time to mean a political thing and not a religious thing, right? It's like when you're talking about freedom, Michael, we're interpreting it as a political thing and not a religious thing, right? We hold up the story of the Exodus, why that was so important for African people when they came here and learned that story, because it talked about freedom as something that was fundamental to your being, right? That the Creator meant for you to be free, no matter what everybody else was telling you. So freedom as a political thing is over here, right? Because we're still not free as a political thing. But as a religious, spiritual essence of who you are meant to be free, right? And you have to know that in a non-political way, because politics will not get you freedom. You have to know it in a different way. So that's the way we have to know our relationship to one another, our covenant to one another. If we continue to hold on to the way in which our congregations are organized, like the government that's around us, we will not get to where we want. So some of the language that we use, we have lost the non-political use of that language, and we bring it into our congregations in this political way. Because it's a horrible thing when at a congregational meeting, the people vote, the majority wins, and they basically just ignore everybody else in the room who voted differently. That's how you do it in politics. That's not how we're supposed to do it as a faith community. What's our relationship to that non-majority opinion, that non-majority experience, that non-majority feeling? How do we widen that circle to incorporate them? Because there's some knowledge there, there's some learning there that can't be disrespected and overlooked in a religious community, right? So when we have kids, when we have youth who are there, not at the center, but we see that what they have to offer is something we should be moving toward. How do we restructure ourselves to move them toward the center? You have people of color, when you have trans people who are not the majority, but they have something we need, how do we move that toward the center? So that's what our covenantal relationship is meant to do, is to push against some of the things that we have learned, that we bring into the congregation, that we've learned from the outside. And then how do we take what we have been able to change and use that to change the world outside of our congregations? You know, for a congregation as a learning environment, we have to be very clear about what we're trying to unlearn so that we can learn new things, right? So we're trying to unlearn majority rule and fake intellectualism and learn something else.
And just like real world too, I just want us to look at the chat and notice how many people are saying they can't be members of our congregations, right? People who clearly would bring so much to, I mean, it's heartbreaking to see in just this small sample how many people are saying that. And that's really important to notice because of the kind of things that, you know, Natalie's talking about there.
So this is such an exciting conversation, and it could go in so many wonderful ways. And I'm aware we have 10 more minutes, and I know General Assembly is next week. So I want to talk, and several people have been asking, so what should we be prepared for at General Assembly? What will be important there?
You asked that specifically as a question to the commission?
Response
Oh,
to
okay. I wasn't sure because I would love to hear what Aisha and Christina have to say about that too, and yeah. Michael, but we'll give that at the end. You guys can say what's important. But quickly from the commission standpoint, so I want to reiterate that we will be making our last report. And I do think that's important. We will be talking a little bit about the context of our recommendations, we will be doing, we're doing 5 panels actually that have pertinence to the recommendations to show real live conversation about this. And guess what? We're all zoomed out. We're all like videoed out. We're all whatever, but they're all going to be recorded and whoops. Oh, there we go. And they're all going to be recorded and we'll have these 5 workshops. Thank you, Marcus, amazing person that you are. That will on theological grounding, education and transformation, congregations is specifically, a workshop specifically. So if you have leaders that you would like to send from congregations that you are in or used to be in, how about, given the chat, you could send them there. Hospitality, reparations, and our first principle, and accountability, agility, and good governance. So we're kind of going to cover the waterfront there, and that's important. But I think most important is also just to watch the conversation that's happening in business meetings. I say this, remembering the teachings of Jenny Corder, who said we really need to be in our business meetings. So I am always in the business meetings when I'm a delegate. I don't use that as the time to go shop in the, whatever, you know, but now I won't use it as a time to go water the garden. I guess it's going to be a little different this year, right? So, but it's really important because we are expecting there to be some supportive resolutions and some resolutions to try to end this, you know, and to try to stop this. So we do expect some people to put out some false news about what our report is about, and it's already starting to happen. And I just watched some people I know didn't mean to join a Facebook group that is part of that resistance. And I'm like, you know what? You might want to check out what you just joined, you know? So I just would ask people to be mindful that people are organizing and trying to create dissension against this. And again, we can have dialogue about the hows. We can have dialogue about your role in it. We can have dialogue about a lot of stuff. As Natalie said, there's a lot of latitude. But the basic question about whether or not we need to do this, folks, the time for that is just gone. And if we don't continue forward, we are going to be obsolete and gone as a faith movement. We truly will. I marched with 1,000 young people in the streets a week ago, and I'll just tell you that they're not going to be at our doors. They're not going to be at our doors if we can't do this basic hospitality work. They won't, you know. So sorry, I'm going again. Okay. I didn't even have coffee this morning. So, go, Martin.
And taking, you know, from what you're saying, Leslie, I think it's important that people know that the youth and young adults who are tasked with volunteering at General Assembly and creating programming for General Assembly have walked away from that role this year because of the very thing that you're talking about the disenfranchisement of their voices. So I would encourage folks. To, you know, to take a look at that YouTube video and, you know, really try and engage in your local levels, local congregations and regions to find out what is it that you can do to make sure that their voices are being centered.
Anything else? I know. Last words from the commission? Anything else that you wish you'd gotten to say?
Natalie, Mary? I think that Elias has a very big Meadville day. I think he may have had to step away.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you, Meg, for all that you've done in making this forum available for the commission and for all of the service that you've done for the Church Larger Fellowship. And we look forward to your leadership now as co-moderator.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really, you know, I said jokingly in the chat that there's the Church of the Dying tradition, right? Which is really what's going to happen if people aren't alive, and the joy of the learning and it's not always, it's painful learning when you're white. You learn a lot of really hard stuff about your people, and you know, the truth will set you free. So I am so grateful for all of the work and I've just, even in the chat today, so many heartbreaking stories that we hear at CLF all the time. And I just want to lift up, because I'm in some of these conversations that you're talking about, that the discrepancy between the lives, the people that you're describing, the human beings that lived experience, and the very thin mental freedom, that they're just not the same thing. They're just not the same thing. And I just really want to be in the church of all bodies, you know, and I feel like having these abstract discussions about freedom is a very meaningless thing to me at this point. I want people's bodies to be free. And Leslie, that's why I think it's so appropriate that you keep talking about the streets, because that's where freedom is being demanded right now, is in the streets. And so I wish more of Unitarian Universalism was in the streets. So thank you to all of you for all of your witness. It's been such a joy. Any other last words from panelists before we go? This is our last show of my last show ever, the last show of the church year for CLF members and others. So
I just want to echo a thank you to you, Meg, because you made this, and this is huge in our faith. So thank you, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you as moderator. Woo, you and Charles Dumont.
Yeah, not going anywhere. Not going anywhere.
I echo Aisha's thanks to you, Meg, for creating this space, co-creating this space, for allowing other people to co-create this space with you. And because you won't say this, I will say that if those of you out there in YouTube world want to honor Meg's contributions to the CLF is raising money to support our learning fellows, and it's an amazing program that brings incredible people like Antonia to all of you out there in the CLF. And that's was Meg's decision of how she would like to be honored. So we will gladly accept your generosity if you choose to give it.
There are so many past and present folks that have been part of the VUU, Meg, that you have, touched their lives, and just in the time that I've been on the VUU, there have been so many amazing people that I've gotten to work with that I just wouldn't have had the opportunity without the invite to be a co-host. So I really appreciate that, and I know that they all really appreciate it a lot.
Thanks. Yeah, shout out to all the people who have been part of the VUU for these years. What are we, 304 shows or something, on something that started as a whim. So that's pretty fun. Thanks again to the commission. Thanks for coming here 7 times, my goodness, and for grounding this so deeply in our theology and our covenant and all that matters. Blessings on the summer, everyone.